Hi, I'm Dr. Greg Owens from the Reimagine Schools podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, another episode of the High Tech Podcast. You are joined by myself, Josh Schwartz, and my co-host, Chuck Norris. No, just joking. I was going to try to pull out...
Upgrade. I'd love to be Chuck Norris.
Oh, no, that's not true. The great William Illingworth.
What's up, folks?
Who joins me here. Hey, another episode, another week with some great topics. Now, this episode is going to be a little bit different. You could say we're gonna play around a little bit in this episode.
Softball.
We're gonna talk about some game-based learning, but before we do that, we need to do our spiel that we do every high-tech podcast. That we know all of you, it wouldn't be the same without it. I know that you'd be missing.
Would it even be the high-tech podcast if we didn't give you our 3 bullet points?
Well, it would be, and it would be season 1, but it wouldn't be season 2 of the High Tech Podcast. Yeah. So anyway, if you are just catching us or just jumping into the High Tech Podcast, first of all, welcome. Second of all, here's a few things you need to know about us. We are online. We are there. We figured out where the internet is, and
some
there's a few places you can connect with us. We don't really like a lot of other social media other than Twitter, and even Twitter, I think sometimes I tolerate, but you can find us on Twitter at High Tech Podcast. Subscribe to us, check us out. We post good stuff, not angry things. We post happy stuff.
Our own gifts and
stuff.
Ted Lasso gifts. What else can you ask for?
That's basically it, and we now interact with a couple people that now interact with us on Twitter. So check us out there, connect with us. We'd love to talk to you on Twitter. You can also find us at inbox at hightechpod.us.
.us.
Nope, I knew it was coming. .us. You can email us there. We have started a thing. We've been doing it for a while. If you're listening to this episode, we ask for a image of an animal that you can either tweet to us or email us to prove that you listened to this episode and connect with us a little bit. So this week, okay, I'm starting a new thing. I gotta step up the ante, okay? So I would like a picture of a zebra driving a Zeppelin, okay? However that needs to work, okay? However you need to make that happen. If you find one in the wild, I'm gonna be so impressed.
In the wild, like a Pokemon. If you catch it,
yeah.
You happen to knock it out with
sleep powder. If you just Google zebra in a Zeppelin and it comes up, I'm gonna be so mind blown. So find that image and either tweet it to us or send it to our email at inbox at hightechpod.us. Also, if you're listening to this on one of your podcast platforms and you haven't checked out our website, go do it. We have a website, hightechpod.us. You can check that website out. We put up... It's coming. I can see it. Just do it.
.us.
Okay. Either way, come check out our website. We post a resource page with every episode we release. And there's a lot of information we put in there that's not in our episodes. And so go check that out. You can find interesting tidbits on how to get started with tools that we talk about, what it does, things like that. So you can check that out at our website. There. Whew! Okay.
Josh, I am so excited. I love this episode.
Such a good series. I love the series.
I love
this
games.
Episode.
I love education.
I love games. We love video games here at the High Tech Podcast.
We're gonna play them tonight still. After
we're
all
gonna
this,
end up playing stuff after we're done recording. And so excited. So we've talked about gamification before in the High Tech Podcast, but we only did like an initial conversation about it. We didn't really get too deep. And gamification or game-based learning, as we're terming it in this series. I think you and I talked about how gamification kind of has some baggage to it that we feel like game-based learning kind of fits better with.
And
what we're looking for.
It's more specific. To me, gamification is like really about the theories of using games in educational context. Like it's actually more specific than we want it to be. Game-based learning means anything that involves games and learning, right?
Yeah.
So one of our episodes coming up soon is going to be about like playful learning and like what does play have to do with learning and what does that mean for attitude in learning. But this episode is definitely more technical, right? We're talking with Chris Morris, our VR wizard.
He is back. The VR wizard is returned.
Like Gandalf the White, he comes back from slaying the Balrog.
Yes. Whew, we are nerds. Chris is back. We're so excited. And this time Chris is joining us while we talked about VR for learning last time he was here. Chris is also, as a VR wizard, is a game designer. He designs games. And so what we thought would be helpful in this series is not just talking to people in teaching and learning, or listening to the two of us drone on for a while about this topic, but actually talking to somebody who actually designs games. The amount of times I've been in a conversation about game-based learning or gamification where somebody has talked about this is how games are designed and this is how it fits into learning, but none of us actually design video games, has been way too much.
Most of the time.
And so, so we decided to bring Chris on to talk about how you design games. Now, I'm going to prepare you. It's going to be kind of crazy because some of the stuff Chris says convinces me that Chris could also be an instructional designer. And so it gets kind of
he might
nuts.
be a better instructional designer than I am. Like, it's good. He knows what he's doing.
He knows what he's doing. So with that said, I'm not going to drone on for any longer. Let's get into talking with Chris about game-based learning, but specifically about what it looks like for him as a game designer to design games and how they do that purposely.
Is that your syncing snaps?
No, I'm just messing around. Like, I was going to leave a couple of seconds. I was planning to leave just a couple of seconds of dead air because it makes it a little easier for me to edit some things. But you know what? Now it's just fun. Now it's just funny. We are here with Chris Morris, our VR friend, our VR wizard, our VR companion.
Exactly.
The wizard is back.
The Wizard of
here.
Oz? No, not quite
No,
Oz.
I'm not the Wizard of Oz. I'm the Wizard of
Clearly
VR.
Gandalf. But a younger Gandalf. Like a Gandalf who hasn't experienced quite as much yet, but like is still having fun. You know? Like that's
Baby Gandalf. I'll take that. That's my new title.
Baby Gandalf. Gandalf the Virtual.
Yes.
ooh, nailed it.
I love it.
Yeah, I'll take it.
As always, we are here to have fun. Josh and I are, just crazy people who talk about education nonstop, but we are thankful in this little series of game-based learning to be talking about some things that cross all of our interests. Josh and I love video
nailed
games.
Yes. If you haven't picked that up from this podcast,
Yeah, we got some
you
gamers
haven't
here.
been paying attention. But yeah, it's like a perfect crossover of two of our passions. I think I could toss it out there. But the miracle of Chris, right? Chris, is that you make the things that Will and I get really excited about.
Yes, I
video
do indeed
games.
make games.
Yeah.
Specifically
video
VR
type.
games.
Yes.
What's your kill count up to at this point? You made 2, 3, 4, 16 games?
I mean, I guess it depends on what you classify as a game.
Playable? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Not a table.
2 officially shipped games. Yeah.
I was taking a drink when he said that. Almost spewed all over the TV. So 2 officially shipped. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
lots
that's
of
2 more than Will and I have created. So
yeah, lots and lots of dead versions of games and half games, and the stuff that you work on and then get thrown out. Yeah.
or it's on the shelf, right? Maybe someday in
it'll
the
come back.
future.
yeah, VR Gandalf the game will come back. Clearly.
VR Gandalf.
Sorry, I'm just assuming that that's one of the dead games he's made.
If you make a Lord of the Rings video game, you will never get me out of your office.
Oh, 100%. I'd like to put it here on live air, Chris.
I'll do it just for you.
Ah, okay, there we go. We have a commitment. You heard it, High Tech Podcast people, because we don't have a name for our people. He's gonna make one. This is a binding contract now.
Yes.
On a very professional Mass Listen to podcast. That's not true.
Signed in ink.
So in the sense of high tech and and all the beautiful things that come together in education and video games, like we see this game-based learning series as an important, even helpful insight for faculty who like have heard gamification. They've heard maybe game-based learning. They hear about badges, right? These are some very
Yeah.
typical things that come up for faculty that make this relevant. Our hope with you tonight, of course, is to like dig into some of the details about how games get made, how you even design a game to get people engaged in them. But of course, from our nerd side is like, well, can we use that? What can we use to like pull people into classrooms and stuff like that? For me, one of my easiest, examples of games in life or game-based learning in action is Starbucks and their like star reward system.
Mhm.
It's so simple, but like people go and get coffees. They go out of their way to get coffees just to get a star.
Oh yeah, they got me hooked.
Well-
How often do you go to Starbucks, Chris?
It's at least once a week.
Oh man.
Oh man. Now let's talk about this for a second. This is all kind of those who jumped in to the game-based learning series, right? We've talked a little bit about this, but like Chris, this is Will and I packaging our plea for you to help us better understand game design, because here's how that idea, in my opinion, gets translated to education. Okay, Chris? Here's the simple package. Okay? Well, games and Starbucks gave away stars and badges. So if I just give away stars and badges for doing homework and things in class, it'll motivate people to be super excited about doing stuff in my class. That's like the very, I don't know, is that an unfair, like just straight breakdown? I feel like that's like when we think game-based learning, educators, Chris, immediately go to like achievements and badges, I think, on the majority. Not everybody, but the majority.
Right.
Now, is that how it works in games? You just like, oh, we give people achievements and badges and they play our games. Is that how it works?
I mean, there's definitely a benefit to rewarding players with some sort of, badge, achievement, reward.
Yeah.
It makes them feel good. It makes them feel like they conquered a goal, conquered their objective in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's why people turn to it, in some sense. Like I was in a presentation at a conference where a university made physical badges, like stickers with a physical badge passport, a little notebook, and like faculty were given this and throughout the year they had to get X amount of stickers in their notebook, and they had success. They were reporting success with their program, but I'm like, that wouldn't get me. Now, for me, that those badges, those stickers need to be tied to something. So if there was like a bonus or more paid days off, or like, that's tangible for Starbucks, right? It's a free coffee. You're going to get more coffee for getting more stars. So those, I think, to me, it's not just the stars, it's not just the achievements, but tying it to something that is rewarding in and of itself. For me, when Xbox first came out, it was one of the leaders in like achievements. I don't know if anybody was doing achievements before Xbox, but when I got mine, I was so motivated as a teenager to get a higher gamer score, a higher achievement score than my peers. I wanted to be the highest. But today, it's 20 years later, who knows, with video games in the Xbox world and stuff like that. Everybody has them, and it doesn't matter to me anymore at all. It lost that value. Now, we've got some questions in mind, some prepped ideas here, but I wanted to lead in with that because I think it's just something that we see often, and Josh and I deal with in the higher ed sphere. When you're designing a game, that's not your first thought, right? Like I can't imagine.
It's clearly the badges. Like they're like, let's think we're gonna start this game. What badges do we need? Clearly, that's the beginning starting point.
Yeah.
What is probably your first asset? Is it the narrative? Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you need to have some sort of like, all right, we're gonna do zombies. We're gonna do something, right? But where do you start with a game?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it depends on the game. It depends on the project. Some games are a bit more game focused, so to speak. So, you know, points, more of a competitive feeling to them, whereas other games are more narrative focused, more cinematic. So I guess that would almost be like a movie with game like elements. Think like
Yeah.
if some of the listeners might know, like Far Cry, I'm pretty sure is pretty cinematic, minimal gameplay.
Yeah.
Whereas something like, I don't know, Pac-Man might be, it is obvious like arcade. There's not much story there.
Hold
Well,
on.
I think
I am
every
deeply engrossed in the Pac-Man storyline.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
just because you have a thing for Mrs. Pac-Man, man, you just put that aside. We don't want to know. No, I think another
told you
easy
not to
one.
tell people.
An easy one is Bejeweled, right? Like almost everyone has played some sort of little Bejeweled game on their phone where you got to like match the jewel shapes up or match the dot colors. Like that's, I think, one of these competitive points-based only games, right?
Yeah.
If they beat the level, you move on.
Yeah, it's almost entirely based off of the numbers and the the points and the ranks at the end of the day.
Right.
Okay.
Where Josh and I, we all, we play some shooters, which I think are about the competition and the engagement there. But
Yeah.
Even the story-based games we play, it might be about experiencing that story, the cinematic experience. That's what you're kind of getting at.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
Okay.
Got it.
So really,
Yeah,
you guys have like a goal in mind that you're going for.
Yeah, in my day-to-day job, we kind of have a few different types of those games. So like some of our projects will lean more in the like arcade realm, whereas some are more cinematic.
And you could even, like, if you were doing a little series, you might do different types of those, even all in the same series. Like, it
Yeah,
doesn't.
exactly.
You're free to do whatever you want, of course, but you could have like a quick, easy Bejeweled thing with something else that has a little storyline about how the jewels came to be, for instance.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, when you're designing a game, it's there's something about the context of the game that's important. So if you're in arcade and there's a arcade machine, you're not expecting for there to be an hour worth of cinematic narrative.
Sure.
When you play that game, you're expecting to swipe your coin and play for a bit, try to get the high score, and you're done. So
Yeah.
Could you imagine Mortal Kombat had like a 50-minute video in between? Like it's like the first round. It's like, okay, now this movie. It's like, while there's a line of people behind you.
Exactly.
Okay. That's cool.
We have a local restaurant, bar, bowling alley, arcade that has drawn a lot of attention. And now all I can imagine in my head is like that place, which is usually pretty packed, just double packed, like just bodies to bodies, and people are standing around all these arcades watching little movies. Like,
there's just lines of people. They're like, come on, hurry up. It's like, listen, hold on. I'm in the intermission. Okay. I'm about to find out what happens to this character I'm very invested in with her snake eyes. Like, I want to know how she got those before I kill this person with a fatality. Yeah.
That's too much. So if you pick up that design, so and where I'd see an immediate parallel is like when we're designing courses, for instance, right on back to the philosophy of tanks. If we're designing courses, we need to know with the faculty member, for instance, like what's the scope of the course, or what do we want to have those students come out with after doing that. So right along this way, we're both designing something. We're both picking a lane, if you will, for the students or the user to go through. And then everything after that, I'm assuming, even on your side, is getting them through that experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to understand what the amount of time you have with the participant is, and what the goals you want to get done with those participants are.
Yeah,
you're basically an instructional designer now, Chris. I just think you should know that. Like, if you've listened to our past episodes, like literally we talk about the fact that like you need to know the goal and how much time you got with the student. What's the we reference it as like what's the gap, right, from the start to the end, and how do we fill in that gap? And that's what I love about this game-based conversation is like you guys are doing a very similar concept to a certain extent. Like you at a philosophical level, it's the same thing. Like I have a goal. I'm not just like making a thing out of like, and maybe sometimes you are, but like I have a goal of what I want to create, and then trying to figure out what that gap is to get there, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. Like when I was listening to the accelerated learning episomes, and it
Nice
made me
plug,
think
thank you.
like, yeah, shout out to the accelerated learning episodes. You should listen to those. I mean, it's a similar approach to how we design our more arcade focused experiences, because we know we have a short time with the participant, and therefore we have to simplify the game objectives.
That makes sense. When you oh gosh, so if you're writing objectives for a game, is it as simple as like, all right, they have to beat the main boss, they have to beat these levels, and then or is it like, so to beat this boss they have to do these 16 things, and then to get through this level they have to do, like, does it get really, I guess, minute as you're making the original design, or do you stay broad picture and you just let the game play out? Like,
Yeah, when you're designing something for like an arcade, like something that's meant to be a quick like 2 to 5 minute experience, you really want to try and stay closer to that high level. Like there's a single objective, there's very easy to understand mechanics that the player will grasp on their first playthrough. It shouldn't take a long time for the player to comprehend what the game is about or what their goal is in the game. You want to stick to that simplification. It's always good to lean into simplification when you're designing games.
I feel like you're writing a design book right now. Like this is blowing my mind.
I want to make a point here. Chris is walking us through. Josh and I are laughing and we're like pacing and we're just like throwing our arms up. You don't know that, folks. You don't see that. But Josh and I
right now.
Josh and I are loving Chris talking, because everything he's talking about is what we do to design a course. The difference being his users pay to enjoy his experience and they want to do it. And our users complain about their experience, even though they've also paid to be there. Like, it's crazy to me, this difference. Like, those are the things we do to make courses, Chris. Like, it's outstanding. Almost one for one a parallel in the decision making and the objectives, and how to, considering it needs to be simpler, especially if we're doing accelerated courses. And yet I think people want to do your things more than they want to do our things.
Well, and I would throw out, Chris, just like to what I think I'm getting amped about is that, like, so to put in an education model, right? I'm listening to you talk, right? And I'm thinking, okay, this is some of the stuff is like not what we do. So like, Will, for instance, like the educator's mindset is to come to, this is all of the content I have to give them a lot of times. And then like, how do I jam it into this space? Not what's the space and what can I fit in there? So like, I'm just imagining the reverse of how this plays out in education is like, sometimes people are like, okay, well, I've only got 6 weeks to work with them, but they all need to know these things. And we jam it in and we try to figure out, it'd be basically like, Chris, you going, okay, I really want them to play Skyrim, but they're only in an arcade for 10 minutes. How do I jam all of Skyrim into an arcade for 10 minutes and they'll totally get this? Like, there's something so cool about what you're saying. Like, you have to think through and make it achievable for them to get into what you're doing, which is really cool.
Right. Yeah, you have to be able to like sum up your game and your intentions of what you're designing in a short, brief, like basically have a log line for your project. And I think that's, I mean, a similarity between games and like courses is that you can't, when you're designing it, you have to be able to like simplify it down to the core, like, I don't know how to explain this.
Like the core idea, like the core thing that they have to do, right? Now I'm curious, just for a second. What's a log line? What you said something there? And I have no idea what that is.
Yeah. So logline is like, it's generally used in like the animation and gaming field.
Okay.
It's basically like a description of the project in like 1 to 2 sentences.
Okay.
Aha.
Okay. So you guys actually get like a short definition of what the project's supposed to be in just a couple sentences.
Yeah, pretty much. Whenever we start a project, we make what's called a gameplay document, and
Okay.
or a game design document. Yeah, interchangeable. But one of the main things about that is being able to concisely define what the game or the experience is going to be. So, for example, I don't know, we have a game where you go into a cave and you collect shiny gold minerals or something like that. Say that's the log line, but then beneath that in the game document, you flesh out what the players do to achieve that objective.
Sounds like a learning blueprint to me. Like we've got things for those too.
I'm just now learning that games have their own syllabus. This is blowing my mind a little bit.
Yeah.
Do the designers read the syllabus? I just got to know. Do they throw the syllabus out?
Yeah, I mean, ideally. Sometimes we stray away from the syllabus, but no, it's the intention behind creating a gameplay document is that everyone on the team and the project can move with a similar intention when they're designing whatever they're designing, whether it be art assets or code that goes into the programming.
So it's a compass or a true North Star for all of you. Like you all get to see how to work together in that same direction. And if I recall, you're a smaller team, but I could imagine that being very important the bigger your team gets. Because if you're not like sitting next to the other 2 or 3 people in your team to do something, to say like, hey, blah, 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 what do you think of this idea? Like, if you don't have that, you'd need a game design document to help keep everybody on track.
Yeah. It's key. It's like, it's basically kind of like a guideline to make sure that you don't spill into those bloated, overly complex game mechanics or narratives that end up making the project feel confusing or overly complex.
Yeah. Cool. All right, we've generally got a sense here. We've built the game. Now, when it comes to and we're relating some of that to how we design courses and build the courses, right? But like once we get a student in a course, they pretty much stay if we get them past week 1 or 2, right? I mean, have you ever dropped a course? I dropped one course in college. Like we all dropped a course.
I've switched out, for sure.
But I know I've worked on specific projects to help retention and to work on what that first week is for students so that they stay in the course and they don't drop and things like that. What's it like to get a player onboarded? How do you get a player like tutorialized? I don't know, better word than that.
Looking up the definition of tutorial.
C. William Illingworth.
Yeah, I mean, the best piece of advice I could give for onboarding someone into an experience is to never make assumptions about the person that is being onboarded. So, for example, let's just say I'm designing a game and there's this bright glowing object that to me as a game designer is very clear that you're supposed to interact with it. Well, that might not be someone else's interpretation of it. And therefore, you need, whether it's text that explains that you are supposed to interact with this object or sound that explains. Basically what I'm trying to say is you have to design for someone that is completely clueless.
Yeah,
Like,
and you need to give a clue. Like that's I
Yeah.
love that you got there. Like there needs to be some and I love that moment, that visual. Like I can imagine being in a VR game, for instance, right? And I come into just an open room. Maybe it's 4 square walls. Maybe it's just infinite, but there's just a light there. And I'm looking around and I'm trying to figure out what to do in this game. And that's the light. And I'm thinking that's the light. You know,
Yeah.
it's providing the visual light for me to see in the room. You as the game designer put it there to touch it to do the next thing. But I don't know that.
Yeah.
Oh
Mhm.
my gosh, how relevant is that to education,
know.
Josh?
I mean, like, how many times do we hear? And this is why I like this is why we called the series game-based learning, and not just like, because another term that's thrown around that we will talk about is gamification. That's often referenced, and in my mind, like, I think we've referenced this before. Game-based learning is not just let's make games in our learning. It's like, how do we take the idea of how you design that experience and put it into education? And there's, like, to this point, like, yeah, we can't assume a student just knows how to do this thing or completely understands this concept that we mentioned. We're like, well, we put a definition, it's super clear. Like, yeah, but do they understand the whole of the definition? Do they understand that's where they're supposed to go to learn? Like, there's a whole lot of carryover in this, especially when we put giant lights in our classes. We really want them to know. No, I'm just
What's the light for, prof?
yeah, or even if we
Yeah,
design the interface of our online courses, that's a huge part of it too.
yeah, I just pictured like a classroom with a bright glowing orb at the front of it.
Sometimes that's how our students look at the professors.
Yeah.
I can't say.
Or how the professor feels about themselves. Ooh.
Oh.
It got harsh. Yeah,
Well,
like,
so one of the things that immediately made me think of, I'm playing a game right now called Fallout, and it's photo realistic. I guess maybe not truly, but like it's real world environments. They actually use images, locations, buildings that are from the real world, and then there's real guns, real tools, real things, right?
well,
And
except
so
for the lasers.
sure.
Sorry.
There are things in it that represent reality, because none of it's clearly real. It's a video game. But like as I'm playing the game, if I'm looking at a wall of things, I don't know which ones I can interact with just looking at them. Like it would be just like looking at a picture. I don't know that I can reach into the picture and grab something. But the game gives me a clue. When I look at something that I can interact with, it immediately says press A to interact. Right. And so that's that clue that gives me some indication of I can do something. Some games highlight things as different colors. Some games, like you were saying, give audio and visual clues. But I think the practical application there is if we need that to help our users learn our game, what are we doing in our courses to help them get that same experience? And
Yeah.
I mean, Chris, do you remember anything from your undergrad? There might be some experiences in your courses. Like, do you ever just feel lost when a teacher's like, hey, we're going to do this, or you need to figure that out, or we're day one of the class, it's like, this is how we're going to go through tanks 101. I know I've felt that.
Yeah, definitely. Like if there's, let's say, a class on, I don't know, animating, and the professor doesn't take the proper time to assess whether or not the students know the animation tool well enough to do what tasks they need, then there's going to be failure, there's going to be confusion, there's going to be frustration from the students. Whereas if the professor takes the proper time to teach the tools that are needed to complete the task, then you'll find more success, you'll find more retention.
Well, and those animation tools, they only have like 4 buttons, right?
Oh yeah, it's easy.
Obviously. Yeah. It's probably 3. It's just like, idea, animate, finish. Those are the 3 buttons in an animation tool, right? Clearly.
Yeah.
No, and I think the carryover also in learning is like, there's a lot of different ways that this happens, but I think it's this idea of like, even how do I onboard students into what are the important concepts? What are the things they need to understand? Well, how do I show what that is? Like the amount of times I've had instructors give like, here's a test. I'm not going to tell you anything that's on it, or like any topic that you need to know. It's just on everything that we've covered from now from now until the beginning of class. Like that's, and it's been 6 weeks. And it's like, well, that's not helpful. That would be like a game telling me like I just ran through all of this area on my own and never telling me that like, oh yeah, all those doors you passed, those were interactable. You probably should have went in there and grabbed some stuff, because when you get to this final boss, it's not gonna be
You're
great.
gonna want that.
Like you're gonna want those things.
Pop quiz: how many trees did you walk past?
What? I was supposed to pay attention to the trees?
Yeah. And we've all seen good examples and bad examples of that in the game world.
I'm gonna go in reverse with the next question and thought. One of the things that I've liked to do and build into some of the learning experiences I've designed is to make sure that if there's going to be tests, you mentioned this, Josh, that may come back to me. If there's going to be an exam or a test or quiz, that in week 1 they get a test or a quiz that's not really a test or a quiz. Like it's like, what's your name? How do you feel about the weather? Like it's just generic throwaway questions, 0 points, or maybe it's free points, right? Maybe it's a free extra credit point, but like the idea that they're being, they get to use the testing tool once before they ever go take a test in it.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's that practice, that safety. Is that something that sounds like something in games, but is that something that you do?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what a tutorial level or a tutorial, I guess, narrative moment is all about.
Okay.
A lot of times in our games, we like to, let's just say there's an enemy or like a threat, something that is time dependent, something that might cause an initial player to get overwhelmed. We don't want to introduce that at the beginning. Instead, we want to do like a tutorial moment where the players can safely practice the mechanics and the toolkit, understand what the gameplay objectives are before they get that sense of like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. There's a lot of pressure.
Josh, Chris and was over at my place with his boyfriend. Marissa was here, and we play this new game to us called Keep Calm and Don't Explode.
Keep talking and nobody explodes.
Keep talking and nobody explodes.
Yeah.
So this is a VR game where the person wearing the VR headset sees a bomb, and then everybody else that's playing uses like their phone or something to pull up a PDF of resource information, and they help the person in VR disarm the bomb. Well, what Chris was just mentioning made me go right back to that experience, because as we got further and further along in the game, it got harder and harder and more urgent, right? But like the first level, all of us could beat it probably without even the help from people in the room. Like it was that simple.
Yeah.
You kind of needed 1 or 2 hints, but like the first bomb, you had 10 minutes. You had 2 puzzles. They were very simple. You could have just tried a couple times and picked up the patterns from observing it, right? Yeah. But that you could not do that at level 5. Like it was that much harder from level 1 to level 5.
That's crazy. That I want to play that game and not blow up. That sounds terrifying. A
little bit.
Chris, now to Will's point here, like, do you guys, I think these are some stuff that Will and I think you guys think through in game design. So we're going to start asking you certain questions to be like, maybe we're not idiots. So is it, you guys, I'm assuming, have like a kind of process to being like, obviously you take the training wheels off after a certain period of time in a game, right? Like you don't just have the tutorials all the time. Like eventually you kind of expect that they've understood certain elements and stop. That is like a thing that you guys work through.
I've played some games that give those tool tips like way too long into the game.
Like I've been 30 hours into the game and they're like, did you know if you press I on your keyboard, inventory opens? Yes, I know. I have entire sets of armor. Stop telling me this.
Yeah. In our games, when we're designing, we have the tutorial moment where it's like huge arrows pointing to what you're supposed to do, do this thing. And there's like a voiceover that tells you what to do. And then as you complete those tasks, we do a check of whether or not the player has completed those tasks. And if they have, then we turn off the tutorial user interface. But, sometimes there are players that just do not complete the tutorial and need that extra help as the game goes along, and therefore we keep those helpful elements on. We don't take them away until they have performed the task correctly. We do a proper check of whether or not they understand what they're supposed to do.
So what happens then in the game world when they check it off this time? They've mastered the skill, and then in a level they can't beat the boss. How do we maybe they've lost us a critical skill from that first tutorial, and they're failing the boss because they don't know how to roll. That's a good thing, right? Like, you got to roll out of the way or else the boss is going to hit you every time. Well, if they forgot to roll, what do we do to help them roll once they keep losing to that boss?
Well, that's how we get them to play again.
Put another quarter in the jukebox.
Yeah.
Nailed it. So that gets to the question we have, kind of the final one, right? Is how do you motivate? So how do you guys think through motivating a gamer to stay playing a game? I think we've all experienced the games we come back to all the time. I play it all the time. And then that game that, like, I was sad because I spent full price on the day it came out, and I played it for like 2 days, and I was like, nope, I don't need to come back to this one ever again. This feels like a day that I can move on.
We went back eventually. That one. I was thinking of Outriders. I was like,
I was thinking of Outriders. We went back eventually. Cyberpunk got uninstalled. Sorry. I love Witcher. So how do you motivate players? Do you guys think through that?
Yeah. We think through that a lot. That's actually something that we're working through right now with our current project.
Okay.
So one of the ways that you can do that is rewards. So let's just say you play a game 5 times, then you get a bonus, much like the Starbucks rewards. And bonus points if that reward is in-game content, because then they use the reward in the game and therefore play again and get a benefit from that within the ecosystem of the game.
Right.
Okay.
Another way we can do that is through leaderboards. Players are kind of innately competitive usually, and if, let's just say, you play a game and you see your name come up as 4th on the leaderboard, 3rd, 4th, you see a couple names above you, you'll have a big incentive to play again, and you'll be motivated to try and get that 1st and 2nd spot.
There was a barcade in Lancaster before our current decades one. It was kind of dark, kind of dingy. It was in a basement. It was perfect. But this is in action, right? I walked in that one night, the first time I'd ever been there, and we grab a drink at the bar, and I sit down at a TV where I see a good old Nintendo Entertainment System with Duck Hunt in it. And I was like, oh, Duck Hunt, I love Duck Hunt. Let me just play a quick round, right? We're all hanging out. Everybody's getting drinks. They're doing their thing. And I play one round of Duck Hunt, and I do get 2nd or 3rd. I'm like, oh. And I know I only missed a few. I was like, I'm going to do this again. And I got 1st. And so I was like, I'm just going to sit here and keep cranking at this. And I just took the entire leaderboard. I got everybody off the leaderboard. And I had a great time. I spent 45 minutes or an hour just sitting there playing Duck Hunt because of that darned leaderboard. But something that's important about that is that first one, I had a chance. I did well enough. I had a chance at being on the leaderboard. If you play and you suck so bad that you can't get on it, that's the demotivator. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I tried so hard, but I couldn't even get on the list. And that's where it has good and bad sides to it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Question, Chris, do you guys think about how to try to get around that? So because I feel like that's a natural positive and negative of the leaderboard, right? Is it it's like a good example, Chris, into what we play. Those who maybe know what the game is, Will and I have referenced it a couple times. It goes by the name of Valorant that we play on our side, right? And this is a good example because Chris also plays Valorant, in case anybody was curious. And Chris is better than Will and I on
by better. Josh and I would be at the bottom,
yes,
and Chris would be at the top,
yes,
every time.
Yes, much better. So Chris, probably more motivated than us to keep going back to Valorant because you're I'm actually good at this game. Will and I struggle, I think, sometimes to get into playing Valorant again, because like we start playing and I'm like, oh, I can't kill anything. Like this is real
I
bad.
haven't played
I'm dying a lot. Yeah, you haven't been on in a while.
on like 2 months. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
I got demotivated. I lost the
Yeah.
interest in trying to fight.
So is there like a way that you guys think about trying to get past that? Are there techniques you guys use to try to kind of counterbalance that when you're using leaderboard concepts?
Well, I guess in a similar way to how Valorant doesn't, you have to like scale the leaderboards with the player's skill. So like, for example, when I am playing by myself, I get ranked with players that are higher level, and therefore I'm not always at the top of the leaderboard, and which motivates me to try and do better, so I am at the top of the leaderboard.
But when he's with us anchors, he's saying it's a lot easier for him. No, I'm joking.
It's like Chris is like, I'm nailing it when I'm with Will and Josh because everybody else sucks.
I mean, if I was always at the top of the leaderboard, then there's, I would argue, equal incentive to not play the game because you feel like you conquered it.
Sure.
So there's pros and cons to being like the best at, on the leaderboard, because then you don't feel that sense of challenge anymore.
Yeah.
Well, and so there's a parallel, or maybe an inverse relationship to like a course or a class context. Like there's a time limit on the leaderboard of a course, right? The leaderboard is you trying to get an A, and that ends at the final exam, right? So there's something that, like, I think there's some applicable parallels, and that was where I was starting this. Like, motivating the students to get through weeks 1 and 2 is important, and helping them stay on top of these things, and maybe challenging them incrementally week to week to like try more, try harder. But they know, and this is a motivation thing in a traditional classroom that's important. They know they're done at 16 weeks, and they can move on, and they won't have to think about this again. I think that's almost a disservice in education. Like, people check off the badge, like, oh yeah, I learned anthropology, and they never study it ever again. Whereas I've been playing Pokemon Go every day since it came out in 2016. I've never, that's 6 years of my life, folks. I'm almost scared.
Yeah.
I'm almost a little sad I've admitted that, but these are the,
No, be proud. Be proud of your Pogo stats.
gotta catch them all, baby.
But
so how do we get a student to do that? I guess that's why I'm raising that question.
Well, what does it come down to? Does it really come down to like you're showing progression? Like, to what you're getting at, Chris, like you guys really are just trying to find ways to show progression, right? And so like some games I feel like naturally have that, right? I defeat this boss, I defeat that boss, but you're also then giving like an award for it, or like, you get stuff from beating that boss. Like I maybe get experience points from beating that boss, and it builds this feeling of progression within the game. And the leaderboard even gives you progression. Like a Valorant shows us progression, sometimes depressing progression, but progression, right? Like, okay? So like we could see that happening, and it motivates us maybe to engage more, because even like all of us like to feel like we're not sucking. Like we all like to feel that at least like we're making progress. Like yesterday I'm better than I was today, like, or tomorrow I'm better than I was. That made no sense. I'm time traveling. Tomorrow I'm better than I was today. So like this progression, and I think where it's applicable, and this is where I start to see like some of the other like really applicable game-based stuff that people are doing that turns into gamification, which is like achievement, even leaderboard, like creating kind of a game experience where students can see themselves on a board of progression, can't be helpful, because I think one thing, it can often be unmotivated.
I love how he tried. To get that cough aside, and it just wasn't going to happen. I'll let him come back to his thought in a second, but I know that one of the things, I muted him, so he's going to come back to it. He's going to be like, how do I unmute? At least he's alive. He keeps walking back and forth so we can see that he's alive. Gosh, I love podcasts. This is fantastic.
It was beautiful.
For me, one of the things that's been interesting and that I want to see play into education, right? So in gaming, there's publishers, there's game developers, and so a publisher might have a bunch of games under it, and a game developer is going to develop more than one game. You all, Chris, right now you're working on a stack. I think you were saying that has going to have 3 games in it, right?
Yeah, we're working on an arcade cabinet that has 3 games that are, similar in their framework, but different in their like gameplay objectives and narratives.
So when we do that, the modern game development actually provides us something we didn't always have and we couldn't do with the old game systems and before the internet, right? I have games that I now play that are all under one publisher, that as I do achievements in the one game, it'll give me a skin in the other game. Or it'll give me a weapon type in the other game, right? And that wasn't possible before the internet, but like I'll play Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon and I'll play Assassin's Creed, and I'll get things for each of those different games just because they're from the same publisher.
Yeah.
And then you've got developers like Borderlands, whoever does Borderlands, I can't remember their house, but Borderlands is 1, 2, 3 games, right? A trilogy. And so as you play 1, you get stuff. And if you've played 1 and then you go play 2, you get stuff in 2 for playing 1. And then if you play 3, you get that idea. Even like in your games, maybe there's going to be relationship between them. I don't know or not, but like that's possible now that wasn't before. And I think an application to education would be so cool. Would be if you could do things in courses that meant something later, that you could take stuff you learn in one course and it would actually impact or be relevant in your next course.
Yeah. Talk about creating, like establishing connections in what you're learning. And, that's actually something that I did as a student that I found really helpful was in my art education, in my game development education, we would take, let's say, models that we created in our modeling and rigging classes and bring them into the games that we created in our game classes, and therefore could see the connections that were established between those 2 things that we were learning.
Yeah. So I'm back now. I'm not dead. Gotta love live podcasting. It's great. The point I was getting at that I think comes out of what you're talking about, Will, and what you're talking about, Chris, is that like there's payoff and there's progression that you're creating into these things. Like there's stuff that you're getting for it. And I think what I like about the components of what game-based learning is doing is saying, like, how do we bring some of those practical elements that games have been able to create, like skins and other things, or what now? Not necessarily skins. We're not awarding students free clothes. Like, oh, you did great. Here's an Assassin's Creed costume. Although I might do better if I got an Assassin's Creed costume. Just tossing it out. Or like
we give out hoodies and stuff and free coffee mugs. Like, why not? It could be a thing.
In Tanks 101, if you do well, you get a tank. No, like
my gosh.
But like at the end, I think it's like it's showing what you get out of that, right? So like it's this progression of like we're gonna help make your growth more tangible, and so we can create some game-based environments where you can actually feel the progression, right? Like we're going to create different assessments that maybe are lower key, and out of those assessments you can get stuff like actual badges and things like that, but at the end those badges are signifying a real piece of progression. They can't just be something that we award just for doing something. They actually have to be something that's awarded for real progression, right? Like real growth. And that's just helping signify it more. And I think games do a good job of that. There are achievements I don't care about because they meant nothing to what I did in the game. They're like, you jumped once. It was like, cool. I didn't know that was a thing I got an award for. But in Elden Ring, when I kill a boss and I get an award for that, that means something. Because I said some very inappropriate words to my screen a lot during
trying to beat that boss.
And I learned tediously where to roll when he starts shooting fire at me. Like, I want to know, I want proof that I beat that thing. And so like I feel like that's where some of this comes in then into what we do in education and how we can design even games and fun learning that happens in this that can help show progression and
and a point to that, beating that boss and even going back to Chris's leaderboards, right, is eventually there's an opportunity to show that to someone else. right? The leaderboards is like beating other people and you can see each other's names, but you might be there with your buddy like, watch, I'm about to beat the leaderboard. Whereas, I just beat that boss, right? And I got that badge for beating that boss. It's like, I want that to go on my card so all my friends who play Elden Ring can see that I beat this boss that they're all struggling to beat. There's some like social element to all of it too.
Yeah, it's providing proof of mastery to
right
others. Right.
I like that.
Meanwhile, ask me where my degrees are. I don't know. I really don't even know where they are. In the house right
mine
now.
are in my office. So
you work in academia, so
I'm a sad person, But behind me I have a Darth Vader head, so those of you who can't see any of our podcast video, that's been there the whole time. Yep. The whole time. You've had no idea.
Yes, Darth Vader's always watching.
There's a looming dark presence.
All right, Chris. Fantastic. This is,
yes.
I mean, I've loved this parallel. Even as you're talking stuff, and I have to bring up something in design, or we ask a question about design, it comes over to video gaming. I don't see how you can't see the parallels between our works. I think it's so cool. Any final words of or things that you're even looking at, like, this is the thing I'm trying to struggle with, or I think we could fix?
Yeah. Something I wanted to bring up, if anyone is struggling with design or how they design their course, or something, a common thread that runs between course design and game design, I think, is just looking at reference and looking at what other people do. Say you're designing a racing game and you're like, I don't know how to design this, from a white, blank slate. Why not look at some racing games for some influence, see what works,
Right.
see what doesn't work. And I imagine that's similar to designing classes.
Well, and that's a big value of the instructional designer, because instructional designers work with so many faculty across so many courses, but there is a little bit of siloing in higher education that's different. Like if you're a faculty member, it is not easy to just go, let's see, some other universities Tanks 101 course. Like, universities keep those behind
property.
paywalls, right? Whereas you could just go and play any other racing game and get some of that reference material. Our faculty, I think, rely on people, either colleagues, like sometimes they find colleagues or conferences that can help them get that reference point, but we can't just Google another course. And that's where designers who work with a lot of faculty do become a good asset, because they've seen how other courses have been done or other projects. And that can be a really big asset for faculty.
Chris, just real quick, curious, because we didn't prep you to ask for an app or anything like that on this episode. Is there, because we're super awesome at planning, but is there like a resource or a place that you guys go in the design world for gaming to like find or get advice from other people? Like, I know like we have places we go. Your answer may just be like, dude, it's Reddit. What? You idiot. Like that's
it's basically Reddit or YouTube. I am
perfect.
I am constantly on YouTube just watching like 100% playthrough of X game just to see and replaying the same 2 seconds over and over to see how they did something.
Wow.
That's awesome.
But
that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, but also, the forums for the tools that we use, all that sort of stuff is also useful too.
Yeah.
But yeah, mostly Reddit and YouTube.
Mostly Reddit and YouTube.
Right. I didn't think that Reddit was ever going to make it on our app list, but I think this is good enough.
It's going to make it there now. Planning. Nailed it. Yeah.
Well, this is fantastic. Yeah, exactly. We're going to have to do a full debrief. Thank you, Chris. This has been awesome. We're going to wrap here. Hope to have you back again. We said that last time and it worked out. Yeah. So I can't wait to continue this conversation.
Guest. Yeah, a recurring character in this game.
At least you're not an NPC.
Yeah.
You get talked to and you talk back.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll hold on here for just a second. Josh and I will debrief the episode and wrap for the day. Well, that was just fantastic.
That was amazing.
I love him. Chris is not only a wizard, I'm privileged to have him as a friend. We also play video games with him, and he covers our backs all the time.
Oh yeah, he's much better than us.
I think he did that even tonight in the podcast, right? Like we're sitting here, we're prepping him with some of these questions about like, how do you design a game? How do you bring a player into the game? Tutorials, how does this all work? And he's done it so many times. He knows how it works. And then as he's decided to like telling us how it works, we're just sitting there going like, Josh and I are looking at each other like, holy crap, that's what he does. That's what we do.
Yeah.
You do that. I do that.
Yeah.
He does, and yeah.
When he's like, yeah, we have a sheet that lays out all the goals and the plan for, I was like, syllabus. It was like, and then when he's talking about like, if you don't follow those main goals, like it could take you off track. And it's like, learning goals. Like,
still
come
important.
on. Like, still important. Like, it was so cool. With Chris's talk, it's very much like just kind of like as we're debriefing, kind of thinking of it. One could say reflecting on what we talked about, bringing it back to our last episode. I think reflecting on it is just this idea that like the reason we kind of go to this game-based learning sometimes. Well, yes, we like to have fun. We want to motivate people. There is something about what video games do in an essence that sometimes I think as learners or like learning design and in education, we look at it and we go, okay, they got that person to sit in front of a screen for like several hours, like, or like the designers of Candy Crush.
For some of us, like days.
Days. Okay, like how do we motivate them to do the same things? Now, obviously, it's very different subject material, but I will say, the process in which Chris describes their game design, aside from the fact of the actual game design, the kind of workflow and how they do it is actually kind of similar to backwards design. It's this idea of like, we have a goal, we have a story, we have a target that we're looking for, and then we design out the game from there. And it's not always like we start from beginning of the story of the game to the end. Sometimes it's kind of, there's a big thorough thread that goes through the story that we focus on, we build out, and then we build out the smaller stuff around. I don't know, like a large project being scaffolded and then building the smaller activities around it.
And it all coming out as a single course on the other side. And I think there's a qualitative difference between Candy Crush and Final Fantasy IX, for instance, right? Candy Crush,
they're basically the same thing.
Somebody probably could have sat in a corner and been like, all right, let's say 6 joules and a grid of 36, and we got to get them in the lowers of 3, and good, go, make it. Let's make lots of money. We'll have microtransactions. Good. And then you think about Final Fantasy IX. If you're not familiar with Final Fantasy IX, when it was released on the PlayStation, it required 4 discs to hold the entire game. It was so
Hold
big.
on, just 1 second. Kids who are listening, sometimes video games needed discs. Okay? We couldn't just download them from the internet.
And you had to go to the game store to buy them.
Yes.
And they had to only come from there. But it was such a huge game for its time. It needed 4 discs. This is like when DVDs needed more than 1 DVD to show the same movie, right? Like that's how much content, how much narrative was in that game. And you could not make Final Fantasy IX without storyboarding, without goals, without sequences of the narrative, without character profile. Like you would need all of that information to accomplish building that game. And none of that has anything to do with actually creating the graphics, writing the script, and making it fun, right? Like, oh, that's still more elements to it. And we can only, like, truly, as a designer, I could only relate, like, the storyboarding and the scripting and the designing of, like, the narrative. That makes sense to education. The rest of it doesn't necessarily have a one-to-one analog, but it still all demonstrates how much work goes into making a video game. And I think what that can teach us about what we could put into our courses. If we did it.
Oh, 100%. And I think, like, even to your point about the differences, like Candy Crush or some of the other stuff we're talking about, like, there's this component where even Chris talked about certain games they're thinking ahead of time about, like, where this game is going to go, right? So, like, a Final Fantasy, or let's put it in modern day and stop sounding like we're ancient people, right? Just saying. What
a dig.
I know. But I love Final Fantasy, don't get me wrong. Like Fortnite or whatever games we're talking about, like that game is very different from Candy Crush or like Angry Birds, or like there's some differences. He even talked about the fact that like even in arcade games they're thinking through about like, where is this gonna go? What's the environment? What is the person that's coming to the game? That was what I thought was great. What's their thing, right? So like
personas.
Obviously they're not the personas. They're not gonna design this insanely long Elden Ring game and throw it in an arcade where somebody's gonna be paying quarters to stay alive. Like, if you did that, so somebody would...
There'd be one kid in Japan literally spending all of his money to beat the game, though.
And everybody else would peace out after the first 5 seconds. Like, so the dynamic of who the person is even plays into what they're doing. And why I think so much of what we wanted to get out of Chris here ties into this idea of just, like, game-based learning, gamification, this whole idea of, like, bringing this game component into it. Is one component of doing game-based learning is actually building and designing courses and materials in kind of the similar fashion of the way that things can get built out, motivating. And I think we learned even in there's some things we can take away from the way they do game design and how we design out our courses. Designing them out with the core goals in mind, who the people are first. Like designing that instead of how often we see courses designed are, well, I got this textbook.
I was about to say
and
that. I was going to say that you didn't say it.
I want to do all of this. I have this textbook. They're going to read this, and I'm going to build everything else around the textbook.
I'm going to follow this 13-chapter textbook chapter by chapter.
Yes, and it's like, wait, hold on. Does that textbook get at the goals? Does it meet the needs of the person? And also, is it all about the textbook? No, it's all about the goals and the content and who the person is and getting them across the gaps, as we've talked about, right? And so, I just thought it was really cool that ended up kind of becoming more of a conversation about instructional design and backwards design than we really anticipated that it would be.
It almost feels like we plan these things out, but alas... Here's the fourth wall. We don't. We just make it work. We have fun. Folks, this is the first episode in our game-based learning series. We're so thrilled to dig into this. We love this topic. As always, please do go back to find us on Twitter. Share us with your friends. Send us your picture at inbox@hightechpod.us. And head to our website, hightechpod.us, to see our resources. Every episode has a resource page. Please share those with your friends, colleagues, etc. If there's anybody who can benefit from those resources. Usually it's information on an app or how to use something or stuff like that. So we want you to be using that information. As always, we're just trying to figure out how to learn what it looks like to harness technology in the physical and digital classroom. We hope you enjoy the journey with us. Until episode 55, where we continue this conversation, see ya.
See ya.